Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. The phrase trustees of modern chemistry has become commonly used enough that most people will understand who you're talking about when you use it. It finds its way into books, movies, and academic presentations on a fairly regular basis. A good chunk of the 20th century saw entire countercultures nearly inseparable from the psychedelic and hallucinogenic drugs that they used. But what if the Lizard King's doors can't be closed? And what if what comes through them is wrong enough to make any potential enlightenment they produce moot? The Interface series, posts 21 through 25. 21st post. They crawl up the mountain. They crawl up the mountain, bare hands on sharp volcanic rocks. The sun beats down on them. It's a grueling test. The island has a secret that it doesn't want to reveal. They draw close to the man at the top of the mountain, keeping their guns trained on him. He has no weapon. His body is fragmented like an image in a broken mirror, various pieces floating without connection, the brightness of the sky showing between them the blood of his insides bright red. His head is like a balloon floating several feet over the rest of him. "Hello, America," the head calls, breaking into a sickly smile. The whites of the eyes are clustered with hemorrhages. Sweat rolls down the face. The Marines don't know how to respond. They ask if he's armed. The question strikes one of them as funny, and he giggles. A tide of giggling comes from the other side of the ridge, behind the fragmented man. The giggling, of course, turns to screaming. "What's going on here? Are you alone?" a Marine asks. The man doesn't seem to understand. One of the Marines tries basic Japanese. The man makes a sour face. "No Nippon. Korea person," the man says. A disembodied hand points to a nearby fragment of his chest. "I Christian," the man says. He pulls a necklace out of his shirt. On the end of the chain is a small metal cross. A tiny, suffering Jesus gleams in the sun. The Marine tries English again. "What's happening here?" "The devil came here." "What?" "The soldiers had built a gate, the child with the command." "I don't understand." A wide smile splits the Korean man's face, and he lets out a loud laugh. Then the smile flees, and suddenly he's weeping. His emotions seem to follow the giggles and the screams that come from inside the mountain. The Marines feel it too, the strange urge to laugh followed by a harrowing fear. The sound beyond the ridge rises. The screams become higher and louder. A wave of maniac giggling joins the screaming so that both sounds fill the air at once. An electric feeling touches the skin of the Marines' arms. They find their minds filling with strange, dark thoughts. Somewhere in a castle in Japan lies a mad god-emperor who has sent his men across the ocean to defend his glorious empire with their blood. On the other side of the world lies the great humming factory called America, the heart of an empire of commerce which once forced Japan to join the world in trade. Machines and flesh now flow along tendril-like courses, delivering goods and death, ensnaring the globe. The sun goes dark, like a light switching off. The Marines instinctively duck, then look up and gasp. Above them, extending miles into the sky, is is an enormous metallic cylinder filling the sky, blocking out the sun. It spins slowly above them, pieces of it flickering and disappearing like the image in a broken movie projector. In a day filled with madness, they find themselves confronted with something wholly beyond their capacity for surprise. They simply mutter soft curses and get closer to the ground. The earth seems to tremble with the sound of the screaming and the laughing, which swirls like a storm all around them. Somewhere near the beach, a Marine pats another Marine on the back, interrupting his stunned gawking, and shouts something into his ear. The second Marine pats the man in front of him, and the message goes up the line like this until it reaches the Marines talking to the fractured man. Pull back. They are to withdraw from the island. The men do not question the order for a moment. They turn and crawl away from the Korean. Below them, the ashen island flashes with pieces of sunlight that manage to slip through the flickering cylinder. When they're almost at the foot of the mountain again, the man stands up and shouts something over the hideous screaming. The Marines cannot hear it and would not have understood it anyways. He screams, "The devil took Jesus to the mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world's glory, saying, 'If you fall down and worship me, I will give it all to you.'" 22nd post. Michael Jackson. Many people believe that Michael Jackson died due to propofol. Not so. He was murdered. He had actually been taking propofol nightly since around 1980, not in order to make himself sleep, but in order to suppress his REM cycles. After several months of REM sleep suppression, the user becomes receptive. In other words, they enter the same state achieved by prolonged and continuous immersion in aerosol LSD. The brain can physically restructure itself simply through thought. By reordering thought, one can physically reorder the processes of the brain. LSD, or long-term propofol use, makes the brain's neurostructure malleable. High-energy rays from outer space are able to penetrate the body, and these can lead to random mutations, or cancers. But sometimes, they lead to changes that are not random at all. Changes which have been intentionally programmed. Changes designed to bring about civilization-level transformations. Michael Jackson was unaware of all of this. He merely knew that the propofol allowed him to enter a sort of waking dream state of heightened creativity. The side effects were horrifying, paranoia and obsession, but he felt that he was strong enough to endure these side effects. The success of Thriller seemed to vindicate his theories about propofol, and unfortunately, he was damned by his own success. So, how did he die? Through the lyrics of Another Part of Me and the vegetable part of Wanna Be Startin' Something, it was quite clear that he had become receptive and neuro-altered in line with Master Design 9. But he was considered to be minimal threat and even perhaps an asset until his mounting financial problems made him a liability. He was terminated, though I'm not sure the exact means. 23rd post. Magical Space Pussy 2. I suppose it's time to tell you what was inside the Magical Space Pussy. You can believe me or not, what do I care? I'm the guy who's been inside the Magical Space Pussy. My life has pretty much been downhill since then. I mean, fuck Neil Armstrong. What did he see? Bunch of gray rocks? Big fucking deal. I saw a cooch growing out of the side of a canyon. Top that, NASA, you tang-drinking cocksuckers. Anyway, where was I? Yes, Uncle Adolf. So I was living in Death Valley, hanging out with the Manson family, and Charlie kept mentioning this guy, Uncle Adolf. I figure he's talking about Hitler because he's sort of into this white supremacy thing. But Then I started realizing that he's talking about a guy who's still alive. Then one day, the guy shows up. They asked me to come over to their cabin, and this old guy was sitting there. White hair, deep tan, lined face, pale eyes. He introduces himself as Adolf, and he's got a German accent. Makes no secret of the fact that he was an ex-Nazi. This made me nervous. That's kind of something that you keep under your hat. He says he found Charlie at Berkeley, that Charlie was perfect for my purpose. I asked what this purpose was, and he said testing. I kind of shrugged because I really didn't give a shit about his coy little answer, and I got up to leave when this mongoloid motherfucker they call Clem punched me straight in the face, and suddenly I was on my ass. There were a couple of girls there, and they jumped on me and held me down, tied my hands behind my back. If I had known what they had done to Sharon Tate, I would have been unspeakably terrified, but as it was, I was merely really scared. They tossed me into the back of the dune buggy and drove out into the desert. It was midday and the sky was just one giant glare. We drove for over an hour, and eventually they got me out and hauled me down into this deep sandy arroyo. They started marching me down it, and they had put wooden stakes into the ground at various points. When we came to them, they seemed to be really careful to always stay in between the stakes. Later, they'd had chains tied between the stakes, and we all had to go under the chains like some kind of obstacle course. I didn't know what to make of it. I had a lot to process at the time. I started to notice that the rock walls of the arroyo were abnormal. There were striations, strange ones, through the rock that looked like the cross sections of giant insect tunnels. I'd never seen rocks like that. The whole thing was just very alien. Then I started to hear the screaming. Up ahead, I could hear people's voices, thousands of voices, all of them screaming and howling at once. Slowly, incredibly, the screaming changed into a kind of laughter. Insane laughter, just giggles and chuckles and titters. I wondered if it was in my head, if I was so scared that my mind had cracked, or if they dosed me with LSD or something. Finally, we went around a bend in the arroyo, and, well, there it was. They said it would be a pussy, and I guess it kind of looked like one. Maybe after some drastic dildo mishap. It was just flesh. Wrinkled, lobed, flabby flesh growing out of the rock like mold or something. It had hair and pores and freckles. Some of it was pale, some of it was black. It was taller than me, and in the center there was an opening. Pink and wet, like a pussy. The Kraut told me he wanted to see its level of development. He took a revolver from one of the girls and pointed it at my face and told me to walk inside. It was either get shot or go into the big mangled pussy. It was honestly a tough choice. There was something completely fucked up, something completely not right about that thing. Something in my bones told me not to go into it, not to go near it, to just take the bullet in the head. But I figured maybe I could go a little bit in and then wait for them to leave and then get the hell out of there. Not a great plan, but it was the best I could come up with at the time. So I went in. The entrance was just barely wide enough to slip into. All I could see was glistening pink flesh ahead. There was this sound like laughter, and then screaming, and then laughter that was coming from deep inside. The walls were blood warm on my shoulders, and the smell was, well, it's what you'd expect. Not great. Let's just say it was not great. I pushed forward and the walls kind of gave way, and I found myself moving through this slimy, suffocating flesh. And I'm starting to panic because my hands are still tied behind my back, and I'm feeling like I'm about to choke on this stuff, and the walls are moving, like pulsating, like I feel like I'm being digested. And then suddenly I'm pushed through into this kind of chamber. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. The chamber was just a nightmare. I mean, I've just never seen that. It was unholy. There were faces and heads and legs, and all of it kind of fused together. The walls were just all of these crawling limbs and these terrified faces and fusions of teeth and cheeks and hair and fingers coming out of knees. And all those people, were they still people? Had they ever been people? Had they been made a part of this thing? I started to scream. Everything around me was screaming. All the mouths on the walls were screaming, and I was screaming too, and then I was laughing, and I felt the hands and the mouths all over my body, and they were tickling me, touching me all over, and then I was screaming again. I had to get out of there. I had to get out of that nightmare. I started pushing back toward the entrance, but the hands were all over me. I felt something bite into my hip. A mouth was biting me. I screamed at the sharp pain and moved away from it, and I started to think that maybe I could get one of the mouths to bite through my ropes, and then I would at least have my hands free. So I struggled to turn and move the ropes toward the mouth, but just when I got it in position, the mouth bit into my finger instead. And the pain was incredible, but I was giggling and laughing, and the mouth pulled the flesh from my finger like it was a chicken wing, and another mouth bit into my shoulder. And I was chuckling away at this point. The hands were grabbing me and pulling on me and pulling me apart and tearing my arms right out of their sockets, and the fingers were digging in between my ribs. I was slathered with blood and screaming as the fingers dug into my eyes. Well, I guess at this point you're probably wondering how I, your intrepid narrator, managed to escape the bottomless pit. How I survived and managed to tell you this tale. I didn't. I simply didn't. I never escaped the bottomless pit. I am the bottomless pit. I am the tree of life. 24th post. The North Korean situation. The North Korean situation in the 1980s was unique, as most North Korean situations are. They built something we haven't seen before or since, an independent flesh interface of enormous size and power, but within a contained incident zone and no metallic cylinders. We detected it via the cosmic ray information signature, which was concentrated on a secure, shielded facility outside of the Hwasong prison camp. This was a huge underground facility which they'd been constructing for over a decade. We anticipated that they would construct a portal-level interface, and were fully prepared to bomb it before it became uncontained. What we didn't expect is that it would achieve level 7 cosmic transmission rates without all the other normal signs of full-fledged portal. We considered bombing it anyways, or using our Brilliant Pebbles kinetic orbital strike system, but instead we managed to get 2 agents into the facility and take a look at it. They achieved high-level security clearance and found that the Koreans were using the flesh interface as an information processing facility. This was quite novel, as we'd always considered them to be potential weapons systems. Our curiosity was truly piqued. Clearly, the Norks knew something that we didn't. Unfortunately, our agents weren't able to access the enormous mainframe chamber, which actually housed the interface. All they knew was that it was in a huge chamber full of temperature-regulated water. We instructed them to breach the chamber and get a look at it, and then send us the data by satellite. We knew full well that it would probably cost them their lives, but we pumped them up with a lot of do-it-for-the-planet rhetoric. So one night, they put on their dive suits and went into the chamber. It was basically like a huge lake, contained within a massive darkened steel box. Imagine a flooded warehouse with endless rows of dim ceiling lights shining down on rippling black water. They jumped into the water, and pretty quickly they picked up some pretty interesting audio signals with varying frequencies, a kind of squeaking, mewling sound. We recognized the sounds for what they were right away, but we had a hard time believing it. Whale songs. The chamber contains several adult humpback whales. 25th post. How do I explain Mother? How do I explain Mother? What was she? Translation of Greek to English. Great Babylon, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I used to lie on my bed, the blinds pulled against the summer sunlight, listening to the sounds of other kids playing outside. I lay there for hours, not sleeping, wondering who had made Mother. She was made from all sorts of different animal parts. One of her feet was a big, heavy hoof. The other was a tiny little cat paw. I could hear her clumping around downstairs. Her smell, the smell of cigarettes and disease, was everywhere in the house, pooling in the darkness. Slowly, night would come and I would imagine floating out of my window, floating up into the deep, starry blue, looking down at all the houses shrinking into tiny boxes, the clean breeze blowing on my face. Oh, how I would cry in my little bed. I was very young when Mother first came. I had another mommy before her, a good one, who wore pearls and had a voice like music. And then one day, I got sick, a fever. I was crying all day, and it went on for weeks. I guess my first mommy just couldn't take it anymore. One night, she left forever. When I came down for breakfast the next morning, this new thing was waiting for me in the kitchen. At least, I think that's what happened. Mother never talked. She just snorted and made horse sounds. Awful. Her parts were sewn together with yarn, and there were patches of wet burlap. I didn't see her eyes until she'd been there almost a year. Have you ever seen horse eyes close up? They're like goat's eyes. They have a sideways pupil. I would come home after school and there would be kids sitting at the breakfast table. She gave them medicine, so they did whatever she wanted them to. It made them just sit there, staring and shaking. Then she would take them down to the basement and make them into things. She tried to make me do it too, but I didn't want to. I realized she was afraid of the Bible. I realized that it had power. Blood power. When I read it to her, her different pieces would shudder and fall apart, and she would howl like a wolf, and blood would run from her segments. The Bible brought transmission from that cross that floated in the red summer sky. Everything in time is arranged around the epicenter wherein the nail drove into Christ's hand. Lines of possibilities radiate outward from it. Kingdoms rise and fall, and men grow and die like flowers in a field. Revelation 17:8. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. There comes a time in a narrative woven by the naturally creative, or those cooked out of their gourds, that the average audience will simply stop following, or have an OMG WTF moment. From there, some stories can power through, while others simply spiral away into absurd chaos. What happens here? Well, we'll find out when we continue the series. Until then, stay scary, my wildlings. Don't do what Adolf tells you, and make the most of your nights.